So what's going on guys, Kate is here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today we are taking a closer look at the weapon and gear perks and which ones are the best for your build in New World. So for each and every single weapon I will show you the best gear / weapon perks you should want to get. And then as well I will give you some alternatives and then explain how basically item perks work in this game, how can you find them and much more. So if all this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So just before we go into each weapon specifically, I want to make few rules clear. So first of all, for each weapon I will not show you all the perks that you can possibly get, but I will specifically tell you the best of the best perks, and most of them will have these 4 common things. So first things first, if you're looking for a very basic answer for all the weapons except the life stuff, then the main 3 perks that you want to get on your weapon is the keen perk, which gives you from 10 to 11% more crit chance. Then the second perk called the enchanted, which adds 9.1% extra damage to light or heavy attacks. And then lastly the vicious perk, which gives you plus 11% critical damage. Then second of all, the best overall amulet for most of the builds is this one, which has this health perk that gives you 9.4% more maximum health. And then for all the DPS builds, you always want to have this ring, which has plus 11% critical chance, and it is called the Keen Awareness. And yes, if you have Keen on your weapon and Keen Awareness on the ring, both these 2 perks will stack on top of each other. And then lastly, for every single build, no matter if you're using one of the Void Bend gear or anything else, you always on your armor want to have at least this Resilient perk, which makes the critical hits deal 4.8% less damage. So with all this out of the way, let's take a closer look at each weapon and their gear perks. So then moving over to the bow, and like for the most weapons you want to get one of these 3 perks called the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious. Getting at least one of them on your weapon is already good, but getting 2 of these perks on one weapon is basically like having a god weapon, and it is technically possible to get on 600 item power weapons all of these 3 perks, but it's super rare, and I haven't seen a single player on my server having this. So having something like this Chain Void perk or even the Corrupted Bane perk is a nice thing to have as additional 3rd slot. And then for your ring, you want to get this Keen Awareness perk, and if possible then the Poison perk as well. Most likely if you're using the bow on one of the 3 abilities, you have chosen to be the Poison Shot, so this is a pretty nice thing to have. And then moving over to the gear, and for one of the best and most common gear perks you can find is this Enfeebling Poison Shot, which when using this Poison Shot ability applies weaken effect on your target, which reduces his damage by 14%. Then second of all, for all of your gear, like per all the builds, you want to get this Resilient and Invigorated perk. And then lastly for your amulet, get the health perk, which will give you more maximum health, and that's about it. So then for the second weapon we have the Rapier, and again you want to get the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious perk. But if you get at least one of them on your weapon and with a decent perks like Leeching Flurry or Keenly Jagged, then that weapon will still be very good. Then for the ring, this time you specifically want to get again the Keen Awareness perk, but as well look for this Leeching perk, which will give you plus 5% health that will be converted from your damage. So as a Rapier player, just from spamming your left clicks you will get pretty decent health back. And then lastly, get again the best amulet for all the builds, which is this health perk that increases your maximum health. And then moving over to the gear, and specifically for the Rapier, there isn't much here. Sure, you could get a slight bonus to evade or fleech ability, but the most useful perk I found is to be this Refreshing perk that reduces your maximum cooldowns by 2.8%. And then this Sundering Repost perk that grants you Rend passive, which reduces damage absorption on the target by 14%. And then lastly, like most of the builds, no matter what type of armor you're running, you want to get this Resilient and Invigorated perk on your gear, and that's about it. So then now we have come to the 3rd weapon, which is the Life Staff. And as this is the only healer weapon specifically meant for healing instead of doing damage, so expect that bunch of perks will be different than the other weapons. So then for the actual Life Staff, you 100% want to get this Bless perk, which gives you plus 20% healing bonus. And then second of all, the best secondary perk is this Refreshing move, which makes your normal attacks reduce your Life Staff's weapon cooldown by 2.8% on each hit. Or then perhaps this Fortify Sacred Ground perk, which makes all allies that got healed by the Sacred Ground round, gain Fortify effect which increases their damage absorption by 9.4%. And then lastly for the ring, this time we again 100% want to get this Sacred perk, which gives you additional 8.4% bonus on outgoing healing. And then if you really want to have the best of the best ring, then having this nature damage perk is a really nice thing to have as well. So then moving over to our gear, and for the healer we don't have much here. Usually as a life staff user for our gear we want to focus on getting as much defensives as possible, so something like this resilient and invigorated perks. But then for the rest armor we want to give space for our secondary weapon, which for most players, if you're running the most popular healer build, will be the life staff and void gauntlet. So stay tuned for that because it's coming up next. And then on top of all this, you again want to get this amulet with the maximum health bonus. So then moving over to the next weapon, which is the Void Gauntlet. And as this is a DPS weapon, you mainly want to get the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious perks. But again, if you at least get one of them, with something like the Keen Speed or Plagued Crits, then this is a still very good weapon to have. So then going over to the Jewelry, and as for the most builds, this stays the same. So I will quickly mention that again, you want to get this Keen Awareness perk if you're going full DPS build, or on the other hand, if your primary weapon is the Life Staff, then specifically get the things I explained in the life staffs part of the video. And then lastly try to get the health perk, which will give you additional 9.4% maximum health. And then for your gear you want to get one or two of these gear perks, depending on which ability you are using for your build. So if you have the Petrifying Scream, then get this Putrefying Scream perk. Then if you have the Void Blade, then get this Various Blade perk. Or if you have the Orb of Decay, then get this Diminishing Orb perk. And then lastly, you want to get this Resilient and Invigorated perk on all of your equipment, and that's about it. And then for the fifth weapon, we have the Fire Staff. And this will be no surprise, but for your weapon, you want to get one or even in the best case scenario, two of these perks called the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious. Then second of all, for your amulet, you want to get again this health perk that will increase your maximum health. And then for your second jewelry, which is the ring, you want to get all these three perks called the Refreshing Evasion, which reduces active cooldowns by 0.95% after exiting the dodge roll animation. Then second of all, get the Keen Awareness perk that will give you additional plus 11% crit chance. And then lastly get the Burning perk, which will make all of your burning that you apply to the enemies last 14% longer. And then moving over to the gear, and for the perks we want to get this Empowering Fireball perk, which will make your fireball ability deal plus 31% damage. Then second of all get the Refreshing Pillar of Fire perk that reduces its ability cooldown by 14% per enemy hit. And then lastly the same goes for all the builds, but you want to get this Resilient and Invigorated perk, and that's it. So then taking a closer look at the next weapon, which is the Ice Gauntlet. And similarly, like in the previous weapons, we want to focus on getting the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious perk. But secondary decent perks that you should not ignore is the Plague Crits, Iced Refresh and Chain Ice. Of course, for the best and the highest damage you want to get one or even two of these best perks I listed previously, but the weapon itself is still very good if it has at least one really good perk with few other secondary perks. And then lastly for your ring you want to get the Keen Awareness perk, which will give you plus 11% crit chance. So then moving over to the gear, and for the amulet you want to get the health perk, which will increase your maximum HP. Then for the second perk, get this Iced Refresh, which if you eliminate a target with the Ice Spikes ability makes all of your Ice Gauntlet ability cooldowns reduce by 74%. Then afterwards for the next gear perk, get this Unending Tough perk, which if the target leaves your Ice Storm ability will make him still take damage for the next 2 seconds. And then lastly, like for all the builds, get the Resilient and Invigorated perk. So then moving over to the Great Axe, and you mainly want to get the Keen, Enchanted or Vicious perk. But specifically on melee weapons, the Enchanted perk is must have, and it is the best of the best because of how much you use the light or heavy attacks. But then other secondary perks like the Keenly Empowered or Mortal Siphoning will give you a nice slight boosts. And then lastly for your ring of choice you want to get this Keen Awareness perk, which will grant you additional plus 11% crit chance. And in the best case scenario get this second perk called the Leeching, which will give you plus 5% damage converted as health. And then moving over to the gear, and for the amulet you want to go with the health perk, which will give you more maximum health. Then second of all, get this insatiable gravity well perk, which will give you plus 50% of your damage back as health to you from the gravity well ability. And then after that, get this next perk called the enfeebling maelstrom, which if you hit the target with the maelstrom ability will make him weaker and reduce his damage by 14%. And then as per usual, get this resilient and freedom perk, and that's about it. Okay, so then moving over to the next weapon, which is the Warhammer. And then for your amulet you want to go with this health perk, which will give you more maximum HP. Then afterwards, for the Warhammer itself, get this keen, enchanted or vicious perk. But like I've said throughout this video, decent perks like the keenly empowered is a great thing to have as well. And then lastly, for your ring, you want to go with the leeching and keen awareness perks, which I already explained in depth in the Great Axe category. So then as for your gear perks, if you're using the wrecking ball, then get this penetrating wrecking ball perk, which if you hit an enemy with this ability will penetrate his armor by additional 19%. Then afterwards, get this sundering shockwave perk, which when using the shockwave ability will apply a rend and reduce the target's damage absorption by 9.5%. And then lastly, for the third perk, get the repulsing clear out, which will knock back the target plus additional 140% further. And then like per all the other builds, get on your armor the resilient or freedom perks, and that's it. So then for one of my last weapons on the list we have the Hatchet, and like most of us know, for the weapon itself we want to get the keen, enchanted or vicious perk, but if you get one of them it's already a good weapon. But a secondary perk like the Chain Arcane is as well a nice addition to have. So then for the amulet you want to get the health perk, which will increase your maximum health by 9.4%. And then for the ring, you want to get the keen awareness perk, which will give you plus 11% crit chance. And then lastly, in the best case scenario, get this leeching perk, which will give you plus 5% damage as health. And then moving over to the gear, and for the first perk, you want to get this keen berserker, which will increase your crit chance by 14% while you're under 50% health, and at the same time if you have activated berserker ability. And then second of all, you want to get this energizing feral rush perk, which for every successful hit with the feral rush ability will give you plus 18 stamina. And then like per usual, you want to get this resilient and invigorated perk. So then moving over to the next weapon, which is the one and only Musket, and for your ring you want to get 100% this keen awareness perk. That will give you plus 11% crit chance. Then for the Musket itself you want to get the keen, enchanted or vicious perk. But for the Musket another amazing choice to have is this Warpal perk, which will increase your headshot damage by 14%. So imagine a Musket player having the crit chance ring with the enchanted perk that gives about 9% extra damage, and then this plus 14% damage to headshots. So basically you could one shot a single player, and this is how most of the Musket players do such a crazy damage. But then for the players who can't afford to get this, or they want to focus more on PvE, then getting this Mortal Lifesteal or Plagued Crits is another good choice of perks to have. And then going over to the gear perks, and for the amulet you want to get this health perk, which will give you additional HP. And then get this refreshing power shot perk, which after eliminating reduces its ability's cooldown by 14%. And then afterwards get the second perk called the empowering shooter stance, which while hitting a target with the shooter stance ability will grant empower passive to you, which increases your damage by 22%. And then lastly, like per the other builds, get this resilient and vigor perk, and that's about it. So then going over to the 11th weapon, which is the spear, and you mainly want to get one of these perks called the keen, enchanted or vicious. But another amazing choice is to have this lifesteal perk that gives you plus 5% damage as health. So then moving over to the ring, and you again want to get this leeching perk, which will give you another plus 5% damage as health. And as we already discussed at the beginning of the video, these two perks will stack. And a very simple and easy way to tell is by their name. So you can see that both the perk descriptions are the same, but they have different names. So on the weapon it's called the life stealing perk, and on the ring it's called the leeching. And by this name difference you can tell that they will stack on top of each other. And then on top of all this, try to get this keen awareness perk, And then lastly for your amulet, you again want to get this health perk, which will increase your maximum health by 9.4%. So then moving over to the gear, and for the first perk, if you're using the vault kick ability, then get this keen vault perk, which when using the ability will increase your crit chance by 18%. Then afterwards, if you're using the skewer ability, then get this enfeebling skewer perk that reduces the target's damage by 14%. And then lastly, get this fortifying perforate perk, which will give you a fortify, which increases your damage absorption by 9.3%. And then on top of all this, like I've said for each and every single weapon, get this resilient perk on your armor. And with all this said, now we have come to the last and final weapon, which is the sword. And as this weapon goes nicely together with a shield, so I will cover both of them. So first things first, as a sword user, you will probably try to be a full tank. But I personally believe that the more damage you will do, the better you'll be able to hold mob aggro in PvE, or in PvP you'll be able to 1v2 or even 1v3. So as a tank, we have plenty defensives and abilities on our own, so for the perks we will want to focus on full damage. So then for the weapon itself, we want to get the keen, enchanted or vicious perk. But something like the keenly empowered will work as well. And a quick disclaimer that the sword with shield, same perks won't stack. So if you for example get keen on your sword, then try to get enchanted or vicious on your shield. And don't waste the same perks on both of them because they have the same name, and like we already discussed, the same name perks can stack. But then for the example on the ring, this keen awareness perk will stack. So you want to get it, and then if it's super important for you to be as tanky as possible, then make sure that you have this opal gem in your ring as well. And then lastly, as a tank, getting this leech perk is very nice thing to have, because the more damage we will do, the more health we will get back. And then moving over to the gear, and for your amulet we want to get the health perk, which will increase our maximum HP. Then second of all, get this repulsing shield bash perk, which will make targets get knocked back additional 93%. And then lastly, get this accelerated defiant stance perk, which will increase your movement speed by 28%. And then on top of all this, like per all the other weapons, we want to get the resilient and invigorated perk for our maximum defensives. For a tank, I prefer to focus on the sword for just one gear or maximum 2 gear perks, and then mainly add other gear perks for the second weapon. So for example, like we did for the great axe, because the great axe had a lot better additional perks to have for the tanks or melee bruisers. And now we have come to the end of the part of the video, but before I leave you, I quickly want to mention 2 things that will help you in this journey to get the best weapon and gear perks for your build. So in this video I showed you the most common and most useful perks that will go with the most builds. But before getting each gear or weapon perk, you need to carefully understand on how this perk system works. So the perks on your weapon are 100% perks that will work with no matter what weapon or abilities you are using. But then the gear perks are different, and some perks are global, which will work in general, and then there are some other perks specifically meant for specific abilities. So let me show you an example. So when I'm talking about global perks, I mean things like resilient or invigorated perk. And these are the perks that will give you less critical damage from other players, and weaken, disease or exhaust that other players do to you will expire 7.5% faster. But then on the other hand, when we have these specific perks, like for example for the bow, we have the enfeebling poison shot perk. And this perk only works if you're using the bow and specifically the poison shot ability. So before getting perks, read their description and carefully make sure that each perk works with the specific abilities that you have chosen for your weapon. If you ever are not sure, then ask other players, or feel free to ask in the comment section down below, or even just Google New World and then the perk's name, and then bunch of results should pop up. For me personally, I have made a lot of different build videos, so I know every single ability and from which weapon they are, so be aware of this. And then lastly, in this video, if you're running a very non-popular build and maybe you didn't find the best perk for your build, then I would recommend to go to the trading post and first of all click on this price arrow, and the most expensive weapons and gear will show up. So for here you can look up and see for your specific weapon or gear what perks are selling for the highest, and then from this you can tell that they are very good. So then here for example, go to the weapon section and then click on the shield section, and here you now know what are the best perks, so you can scroll down to the items that you want to buy, or on the other hand you can do is click on this perk tab, and here you can select the perks that you want to look for. So for example, I mentioned that for the bow players you want to get this enfeebling poison shot perk. So all that you have to do is click on it and then go to the general tab, which are these 9 small square icons. And now here the trading post will only show you the items for sale with this specific perk. And then on top of all this, if it isn't cleared by now, but I recommend for players to start thinking about their perks only from level 60 and beyond, because at early game you will be changing your gear and weapons very fast. So my recommendation is to first of all decide what build you want to use, and then find the best gear and weapon perks for the specific abilities you have chosen, and then you can just simply buy them in the trading post or perhaps craft them yourself. And that's about it. So I really do appreciate everyone for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or if you have any other new world guides or video ideas that you would like to see in the next video, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe, and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and you won't miss any more amazing content from me. With that said, you have an amazing day and I'll catch you in my next video. So take it easy. Peace.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane, I'ma do it all for you. Come along and see it's true.